Okay. Well, thank you this morning, everyone, for joining us for the latest webinar in our series. We once again are blessed to have with us Rose Niles to share with us and talk about this topic of equipping your mission with legacy. And I'm not going to stand on ceremony. I am just going to turn things over to Rose.
Thank you so much, Lori. Thank you, Fran. Thank you all for gathering. This is a tremendous opportunity for me. I kind of grew up in the Synod of the Northeast. I'd say that was my extracurricular activity when I was a kid in high school and in college. So it's really a blessing for me to have been welcomed back in my new role as Ministry Relations Officer for the Northeast region so generously, and have these opportunities to share the resources of the Presbyterian Foundation, which, as you know, was established in 1799 as the first trustees of our denomination, and has been bringing people and resources for mission together ever since. And so actually, I just received an emergency phone call. I thought to myself, what a cool thing to be able to share with people. I just got an emergency phone call from a church leader who is really anxious about jumpstarting their legacy program in their church. And he had taken the Day of Learning present webinar back in March. We had three different webinars that were devoted to legacy giving and plan giving. And so he had done that, and he had started to begin to put some pieces together, and actually called me yesterday, and I didn't get a chance to call him back. And he called again this morning, anxious to get the support that he needs to move their legacy giving program forward. So there is a sense of urgency. I'd say that probably at least 60% of the calls that I'm getting, not so much now in the fall, there's a lot more stewardship calls, because we are the stewardship education arm of the church now. So people begin to want resourcing around stewardship programming, but a lot of churches are thinking about legacy giving, and that's a great thing. The very first church that I served in New York City Presbytery was a mission church, founded as a mission church of First Presbyterian Church in Manhattan. And when I took this call, I that was 30 years ago. so it wasn't really on top for me. But suddenly I remembered that the reason why that little church on the Lower East Side of Manhattan was able to have a pastor at that time was because they got money quarterly from an endowment that had been established to support them in perpetuity that was held at First Presbyterian Church in Manhattan. And so my first call in ministry, ordained call, was supported by the gifts that were left from prior generations. So I want to welcome you all from all the places where you are. And I'm here past this webinar to serve as a consultant for the specific concerns and issues that you may have, the specific questions that you may have about, because we're all at different places. One of the things that the webinar series that we did in March lifted up is that we want to find the right size program for your church. And your church may already have some things that you're doing around legacy giving, or you may have something that you did in the past. When I go to visit churches, at some point the pastor sees me wandering, or the host committee sees me wandering around the building, and I'm studying the plaques. I'm examining the pews to see if there are any nameplates on the pews. And I'm looking at the walls in the narthex to see, what the plaques are. And a lot of times they say, well, I've just stopped noticing these things. And I say, no, you've got to pay attention, because how we honor the history of these legacy gifts does make a difference to creating a culture that says it makes a difference to us. So that's, by way of introduction to me, and also why I get up every morning enthusiastically to do the work that I do on behalf of the foundation, on behalf of all of you. I'm going to start the presentation. Actually, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share my screen and share the presentation with you.
And you should be able to.
Okie dokie. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Is there a presentation on the screen?
Yes, there is.
Great. Trying to get it to go from the beginning and moving some things around here. Okay, that's better. So today we're talking about the ways in which we can grow legacy giving in our churches. I always like to start with a prayer and a scripture. This is probably the anchoring scripture of my ministry right now. Luke 6:38 in the version from the Message. Give away your life. You'll find life given back, but not merely given back with bonus and blessing. Giving, not getting is the way. Generosity begets generosity. Let us pray. Our Lord and our God, we give you thanks for this day, for the opportunity to give praise and honor to those who have gone before us, who planted seeds so that the future of sharing the gospel could be robust and go forward into future generations. We ask that you help us to be able to lead our various settings of ministry into a deeper understanding of the way in which we can transmit our values and make the things that we love continue in ways that will continue to impact lives through Jesus Christ our Lord. We give you thanks for those who are gathered here this day, for their various ministries and ways in which they are proclaiming that there is a living God through our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, by the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen and amen. As I mentioned, wow, everything is kind of, as I mentioned, we're one of the 6 agencies of the PCUSA, founded in 1799 to cultivate, attract, and manage financial resources for mission. We bring people and mission together. We have an excellent website. So again, if you want to learn more about the ways in which endowments can make a difference, you see it's one of the tabs on our website, www.presbyterianfoundation.org/churches. And then any of these options will give you a lot of great resources, and we have lots of tools in our toolbox. This is my contact information. You'll be getting this presentation, so you'll be able to reach out to me for follow-up and walking alongside you as you implement the things that work best for your situation. This is an overview of the things that I do on a regular basis, free of charge. A lot of times people will ask me, well, what does it cost to have you come to our church and work with us? And the answer is nothing, because we already work for you. So that, I think, is one of the best kept secrets of the work of the Presbyterian Foundation. Here is a slide that I want to take a little bit of time on. This is actually the top page from a brochure about our permanent endowment funds. When the Presbyterian Foundation was originally founded, for many, many years, for 190 years, or 170 years, it was the main work of the foundation to steward what are called permanent endowment funds, or the Presbyterian endowment funds. And so when we ask the question, why is it a good idea to have endowments? I think that this particular brochure, which shows the actual returns of the permanent endowment funds, of which we have over 7,000 now that we steward. A giver will decide what it is that they love. They'll make an irrevocable gift and designate the beneficiary of what it is that they love in Presbyterian mission and ministry in their church, or their council, or a larger council of the church. I love Presbyterian disaster assistance. I want a piece of my legacy to go to support that. And then once it's set up as a permanent endowment fund, it will continue to be sending out 4 or 5% annually, quarterly, to the beneficiary in perpetuity. You know, it can never be changed. It's like the Copiel commercials that we used to see when I was a kid, and the guy would say, set it and forget it. You know, it's a set it and forget it situation, and it's also an irrevocable gift. But these permanent endowment funds, if you had placed $100,000 in the Presbyterian Endowment Fund in 40 years ago, in 1980, at the rate that it was, and the rate is adjustable. That's part of what the trustees of the Presbyterian Foundation do. They change the rate depending on the forecast for the way that the investments are understood to perform in the time horizon. So we're in the process of moving from a 4.25 disbursement rate to a 4% slowly over a few years. But at some points in this 40-year period, it might have been 5%. So it's anywhere between 4 and 5%, a prudent disbursement. That $100,000 permanent fund, endowment fund, paid out over the 40 years to the beneficiary, which could have been your church, $493,000. And it stands now in 2020. Well, maybe not now. Well, there's a fluctuation in the markets, and we're a little separated from the date 2020. There is an updated version of this brochure, but I just happen to have this slide ready. $291,000. It stands at $291,000 paid out for the mission that was close to the establisher's heart, $493,000, and stands today at $291,000 if today was 2020. So this is the power of an endowment over time to both support mission and ministry and to grow the resource and the gift. And that is, this is an illustration that I like for people to see. Now, of course, if it hadn't been paying out the $493,000, the 5% annually, it would have stood over $2 million. Because then the compounding and the growth of the investment would have made it grow even further. So I'm going to briefly stop sharing my screen and invite you. We're a relatively small group, so I would like to invite you to give me any reactions or responses that you have, if you'd like to that particular slide. I'd like to find out how people react to that slide, because I know when I first saw that slide, I thought, that doesn't seem possible, you know? But I'm sure some of you are more familiar with the rate of returns of endowments than I was when I first saw that. Does anybody want to either share their reaction to that particular slide, or yeah, I see folks putting into the chat, someone said, wow, you know. Does anybody want, and feel free to put it in the chat if you don't want to unmute and say something about it. All right, I just wanted to give you all a chance to check in. I think wow was a pretty good reaction. I'm going to go back and continue. Okay. I want to emphasize that I think that like with everything else, oftentimes when I'm invited to churches to talk about endowments, people want me to talk about the how of the endowment. What is it that the foundation offers that allows people to make their gifts, and what type of gifts can they make? And we'll get there in this conversation. But what I say to folks, like I remember a presbytery reached out to me for an end of the year statement that they could put into their newsletter at the end of, towards the end of the year, about end of the year giving. And they wanted to emphasize the IRA qualified minimum distribution, the required minimum distribution that people have to make from their IRA. And they wanted to be sure that their language was correct, describing how people would give and you know, what are the things people need to know about giving, that it has to go directly from their manager to the institution. It has tax benefits. You know, they wanted me to share with them the language they could use to describe the how. How would you give? And what are the things you should know about giving in that way? And I said, well, yes, all the language can be crafted, but you have to start with the why. You have to start with the why people would want to give. You know, why, what is it that is being supported by your presbytery that people are moved by? Something that your presbytery does that individual churches and individuals couldn't do on their own. You start by telling a great story. We say stewardship or developing a culture of generosity is about time, talent, treasure, and testimony. It's telling your story. So you have to begin by thinking about what is it that we love? What is it that we as givers love about our church? What is it that we have been moved by the impact of the ministries and the mission and values of our church over a lifetime? Legacy giving comes from our lifetime accumulated life energy. We say that in stewardship of annual giving usually comes from your annual paycheck, your annual salary. Major gifts towards churches or ministries comes from accumulated assets, but legacy giving comes from the framework of meaning. It all relates. You know, the last webinar that I did, which resides on the Synod of the Northeast website, was about how we connect values, our mission statement, and our vision plan to our stewardship programs, and that they have to be connected. And so this is the same reality for our legacy giving programs. We need to begin the conversation with what gives people joy about their connection to our church. We need to begin to think about helping people to make those connections and to rejoice and celebrate and hear great stories about the things that are happening through our church and the lives that are being impacted through our church. And we need to begin a conversation with people where they're invited to reflect on how the church helped them raise their children. And now their children are members of churches, and their grandchildren are learning their values. And that the church has been a harbor for them as they went through losing loved ones and going through divorces, and the way in which the church ministered to their spirit, and how much they love the music program, and how much they love the ministries to the outreach in the community. that the church, and everybody will be different. Everybody will have a different why, but we need to create a culture in our churches that allows people to see the connection between their why, their beloved aspects of what they love about your church, and then connect it to the ways in which we all start to think. I saw my daughter this past weekend. She flew in on a red eye because a beloved cousin of ours passed away. And my daughter just graduated with her doctorate. She and her husband are buying their first home in California, which seems miraculous when you think about California real estate prices. And it suddenly dawned on me that my daughter won't be needing the level of legacy that I might have been considering giving to her. And I'm not alone in that, right? You know, many people, when we see the joy of seeing our family established in life, we start to begin to realize that we can do the things we've loved can get a portion of what it is that we have to offer to the future. And at the same time, show love to our family. But we'll be talking more about those issues. But starting with the why is the critical piece that a lot of people miss. They start a program, they put a bulletin insert into their bulletin that tells people how to give. But we need to begin to develop a culture that is a joyful conversation about our theology of gratitude. I'm so grateful when I think about the goodness of God to my only child, my daughter, and the way in which she goes to church, and her daughter is learning the faith, you know. And I think about the things that I have loved, that I now am 61. That's about the right age to start talking to people, I think, you know, before retirement, before you begin to start a conversation. Of course, there are different life transitional points. Like when my daughter and her husband had their baby, they started talking about legacy. So young people start thinking about legacy when they're thinking about who will be the guardians of my child and what will become of my legacy if something were to happen to us. You know, people start having these thoughts and making these decisions and needing to be resourced, and the church can be a tremendous center of resourcing, you know, and engaging in these conversations and pulling together resources for people as they are beginning to realize that my life is changing, and I'm so grateful for the way God has kept me through all the points of my life. So starting with the why, I hope I've really emphasized that enough, because it is absolutely critical. I want to share a tale of two churches. The tale of two churches is one that I heard when I was visiting a church. One of the things that we do for churches that are invested with us in the various ways that churches invest with the Presbyterian Foundation, which I'll show you a diagram that shows what those are as part of our resources, is that we visit the churches on their invitation. I mean, I'll visit any church on invitation, but specifically when churches are invested with us, oftentimes they like us to come and we offer it to offer a kind of investment review to help them understand ways in which they can continue to grow and to be a resource to them. So I was visiting one particular church that has $5 million in their endowment fund. And I was meeting with the leaders of the church, and they told me that their endowment started in the 80s, the 1980s, similar to the diagram that I showed you there. Their endowment began with a bequest from a gentleman who was not a member of their church, but who really liked their church, visited their church, but he liked two churches in town. So this is a tale of two churches. And the two churches that he liked each got $30,000 in his estate plan upon his going to be with with God in glory. And so when he passed away, he left one church that he liked $30,000. He left another church that he liked $30,000. Well, one of the churches decided that they wanted to use that $30,000 to put a beautiful copper roof on their church. The other church, which was the church that I was visiting, then took that $30,000 and turned it into a $5 million endowment, decided that they wanted to put that money towards dedicated to serving mission causes in their community, and making a difference with that money. That money would be restricted for mission outreach in the community, and that they would invest it and use the proceeds and let it grow. But at the same time, they decided to begin a robust legacy giving program and to set up a committee, a team, and they call it the Gifts Committee, that would work to help people understand a simple process to also establish named endowment funds for particular purposes or unrestricted purposes to support the church. And so, you know, they invested with the Presbyterian Foundation through one of our programs. We are great at investment management, but there's no way we could have built it in the 40 years. You see the rate of growth from that chart that I showed you earlier. It wouldn't have grown to $5 million just from 30,000, particularly not with spending from it. But they had a number of people, and over time, they built the collective conversation about why give to support this beloved church in ways that people decided they wanted to do that. And they established additional named endowments and unrestricted endowments in their various leaders in the church did this over the 40 years. And now, or at least as of last year, their endowment stood at $5 million. And it was because of that they were able to withstand the changes of the pandemic and continue to be a very creative church that's looking at new. As a group, they were reading a book called The Post-Pandemic Church, and they're looking to embrace their future with hope because they stand on a solid, stable platform of the people that saw the need to establish that. I will tell you that they also told me that the church that got the copper roof is no longer a church in their community. So having the wisdom, the collective wisdom to decide to invest for the future and establish an endowment makes a huge difference for the future of the ministry that you love and care about. So values, mission, and vision are vital. There's a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's actually an industry. You've got the 7 habits of highly effective everythings. You know, Stephen Covey is the author. And one of the 7 effective habits is to put first things first. And I hope that if you take nothing else away from this, that you grasp on that I'm trying to emphasize that the first things first we have to put first are our values, our mission, vision, and telling our stories about it. Creating a culture of generosity depends on people understanding why we give, why we support the things that we love, you know, in the life of our church. So I would like to invite you to do something. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. Some of you may have experienced something called a flash chat. I'd like you to take a minute, if you can, to go into the chat feature, make sure it's oriented to everyone, and put into the chat your answer to the question, what you think the obstacles are, why you think people don't give, or why you wouldn't give to an endowment. You can go ahead and put it in now, but I just want to say a flash chat is when people put it in and they wait and they populate it all at once, and then it becomes very exciting. It becomes sort of like drum roll. But go ahead and put your answers in now. This is not a flash chat. This is like popcorn, I like to say. You know, put it in when you're ready to pop. I see some answers. Someone said, Laura said, no one asks. Lisa said, belief of scarcity. Leah said it isn't talked about enough, which is why we talk about a year-round program. Pastor Torre says lack of education about how they work. Yes. Lori said, don't think your gift is big enough to make a difference. I will tell you that $5 million gift was made up of many small gifts. Not that $5 million endowment was made up of many smaller gifts and a few large ones. While there is division within the congregation, few are willing to give or give in a restricted manner to buildings and grounds. Yes, the health of the church, the overall health of the church, and lack of information, someone saying, not empowering people to make an impact, no matter how great or small, want to save for the kids, etc. Yes. Not everybody will be able to give. This is not a kind of guilt trip that requires everybody, but it's an invitation to say, there are some folks for whom this would be a blessing, a blessing, a blessing. I want to go back to the one that says, while there is division within the congregation, few are willing to give or give in a restricted manner. I was working with a church that's begun building a planned giving program a couple of weekends ago, and we got into a very deep conversation about this dimension of the obstacles. And someone talked about the fact that they had to leave a church that went to eco. And what would have happened if they would have left their legacy? They had wanted to give their legacy. And it was a church that they had been part of for 40 years. And they were just really broken. You could see the grief that they felt. And it had raised issues of trust. So I think issues of trust are sometimes the hidden issues that create obstacles. And it's very important to surface them in a way that people know that when you set up these kinds of gifts, you can also have a contingent beneficiary. So that contingent beneficiary would be if circumstances change and the church is no longer within the denomination, you have it set up so that it goes to another, to the presbytery or another cause that is the cause that you want to support. Very good. It's really important for us to surface as part of the leaders of these kinds of programs to pay attention to and learn kind of what are the reasons why people may hesitate, and set up our program in ways that we get ahead of those. We go ahead of those concerns and help people to see possibilities. There's a little book by Henry Nouwen that some of you may already be familiar with. Henry Nouwen is the Roman Catholic scholar and author that many of us are familiar with from many of his popular books, like The Wounded Healer. The Wounded Healer by Henry Nouwen is one that many people know about. But he wrote a little offset called The Spirituality of Fundraising. And in this little book, this little offset that he has, it's available on Amazon. And he talks about like his own struggles with the issue, and how he has come to realize that it's just such a blessing for people who have the resources. And to some degree, we all have some of the resources, because you'll see in my presentation, which I'll probably be flying through by that point, but you'll get it and you'll be able to ask me questions about it and reach out to me, that everybody can give. People can give a small percentage of their life insurance, for example. They can tithe on their life insurance, 10%, that percentage goes to support the thing that I love in my church. It's not an all or nothing deal, but it's raising the question. Or there's one church that I participated in where a significant endowment was created because just for a period of 10 years, someone decided to give their required minimum distribution from their IRA towards building an endowment, a named endowment, as part of the corpus of their church's endowment fund. And so over that 10-year period, it became a significant amount, and the amount is not the point, because whether it's that 10-year created a $50,000 endowment or $1 million endowment, which happens to be what it was, it still is significant because all of the gifts add up over time and they grow, as you saw, over time. So I will switch back to sharing again. Okay, so then the question is, then what? Once you've established a robust conversation about why it matters, what we love in our church, what brings us joy in our church, the question is, then what? And one of the first things we talk about, we have an actual kit that we offer to churches called Legacy of a Lifetime. And it's kind of an overview, a step-by-step way. We also have webinars that were done as our day of learning back in March, that can be viewed, that reside on the Foundation's website. Just search for Day of Learning in our search function, and you'll get several days of learning that we had, and look for the most recent one on Plan Giving. So we have a lot of resources to help people think about, how would I go about? And I am a resource. And as I mentioned, a free resource to work with your church and your session. Governance is important, and making sure that you have policies in place before you begin a robust plan giving program is important. So the what and the how has to begin in some ways with resources that you can use to create your own endowment policies. And we suggest that you have policies around general, how is this endowment envisioned? What is our vision for the endowment? What is our faith-based understanding of this endowment? Starts with scripture. It starts with, oftentimes a faith statement, a statement of faith, then the founding of these endowments, and then policies and procedures, for these endowments, which a comprehensive policy includes gift receiving, some sort of boundaries, guardrails for what kinds of gifts we would receive and how we would receive them, how they'll be stewarded, how the endowment is established. There are ways to establish an endowment. One of the things that didn't come up in the obstacles that often I hear is that it'll eat into our annual stewardship program. If there's a large endowment, which tends to be true, actually. Sometimes if there's a large endowment, people don't give as robustly to the annual giving programs of the church and the stewardship program. But there are ways when you create your endowment policies to ensure that people see, and these policies don't just live on a shelf, they get interpreted and stories told about them. They get connected to the decisions that people are making to be generous towards the things that they've loved and to make sure that they exist in the future. So that, for example, you make sure that that you don't just support, there's one part of the endowment to support bricks and mortar and capital, but you make sure that it says that is for things outside of usual maintenance, in the church. The usual upkeep of the church is not included in what the endowment will support. The endowment will support extraordinary things like the furnace breaks or the roof, gives way and you weren't anticipating that. And then you have another, we like to suggest a kind of a 3-bucket approach, which is another bucket is for mission. Younger people in the church and many older people in the church too want to see their church involved with impacting lives outside the walls of the church, and so you have part of the endowment that creatively supports the part that you can restrict. Pieces of this may not be under your ability to restrict because it's already restricted by the donor, but the part that the church can give guidance to, the session can give guidance to, you say part of this will support mission, and you have great stories that you can tell about those missions that you're supporting outside of yourselves. And then a piece is there to support the ways in which your church is growing spiritually, whether that's, and I would kind of define it that broadly, because there are new ways to develop spirit, and rather than, sometimes people say our Christian education programs, but spiritual growth in the church can be much broader than that. So it's a good idea perhaps to define it as broadly as possible. And some people will even say and a fourth aspect for new programming, things that we just want to try, experiments, things that we need to do to jumpstart, like what do they call it? An innovation incubator, in the life of the church. So you can be really creative in ways that people begin to recognize that this is not the annual giving, the steward's annual pledging process. This is just for things other than that, the endowment. That doesn't mean that someone couldn't, in fact, we have a program that we like to offer to churches, particularly when you have a few donors that are supporting the bulk of the budget in your church, the bulk of the mission and ministry of your church. Sometimes when we do giving analyses for churches, we discover that 2 or 3 or 4 families are giving 60%, 40% of the budget of the church. Then we suggest a conversation be had about endowing the pledge. You can have conversations about how to consider, if your pledge really is fundamental to the life of the church, would you like to endow your pledge so that it can continue on in the future? So we have materials for that. It's a little mini program that we have in the foundation. But I want to make sure that I get in here that when I worked in development work for seminaries, the resources that really are so valuable to a church from a giver or to a program from a giver are unrestricted. So you want to have a team. You want to, as you develop your play and giving program and you offer events and opportunities to educate folks who may be thinking about doing this, you want to suggest to them that they develop a kind of a team approach, and their team can be made up of their own financial advisor, their pastor, or a member of your gift committee. The foundation and I, as the ministry relations officer, certainly happy to be part of the team. Very often, the 2 items we suggest that churches develop before they launch the program, a brochure and a page on your website, or however you do social media, making sure that there you make these suggestions, that people put a team together. And in the process of having conversations, and also because your policies may name that certain gifts have to be discussed before they're made. You don't want, I worked with a church that someone out of the blue left them a gas station. That's a hard gift because it involves cleaning it up before you can sell it, and so you might have said no to that gift, there are some situations, some houses, some real estate, some art collections, these kinds of things that you may, some gifts that may not be what you would prefer to receive. And so doing that delicately, but carefully and caringly is part of the process. But you also want to encourage people to make their gifts as least restricted as possible. We worked with a donor, giver who wanted to support youth ministry in her church, and she wanted to establish a permanent endowment fund because she wanted to be sure that the principal could never be invaded. So she wanted it held by the foundation, and she was going to establish it during her lifetime and then complete it in her bequest. And the initial conversation with her pastor, she said that she wanted it to fund a staff person for youth ministry. And in conversation with us in the foundation and the pastor, over a long period of time, we helped her to understand that in 50 years, her church might not have a need for that youth ministry position. And if she named it in that restrictive manner, then the money couldn't be spent. The money just couldn't be spent if the church didn't need it for that. Or there would be a long, expensive process to go to court and get what's called a cypre and try to change that restriction. So in order to say, have it trust, again, it comes back to that trust issue, trust the future leaders of the church, right in there that you prefer, it could be spent for a staff person, but say it should be spent to support Christian education and youth work in the church, So try to encourage for gifts to be the least restriction possible, but with clarity, show forth what the giver, where their heart is. So I have slides here in this presentation for that you might want to use yourself to share with people, or to go back and share with your governing board, your session, what it is. And certainly I can be invited in to make these presentations to specific churches about what plan giving is. I'm sure we know a current plan to make a future gift, a gift from assets rather than income, a gift with current or future tax benefits. And here another key question comes up. Legacy leveraging with children and grandchildren. I worked with a family when I was involved, when I was serving Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary. And after several visits with the 90-year-old couple, they disclosed to me that they had included the seminary in their estate plan as part of half of the residual of their estate. So they were taking care of their 4 sons and their many grandchildren, but because of their values, because the values they had lived out all their life and the conversations that they had had with their sons rejoiced in the decision for them to be remembered by the places that they loved. One was their school, one of their schools. Their college was getting part of the residual of their estate, and the seminary was getting another part. Now, their church that they most dearly loved had left and gone to ECO. So I think that was part of the thinking. I'm sure that their church that they most dearly loved would have been part of that residual of this couple's estate if it wasn't for the fact that they went to ECO. But the legacy and leveraging the conversation about values, the why that we started out talking about, and helping, wouldn't it be great to develop conversations and resources to enable those conversations to happen, those meaning conversations. We have something called donor advised funds through the New Covenant Trust Company. Donor advised funds have great tax benefits for families. They're no longer itemized, but they're often out of reach because often they have to be very large amounts of money to set them up. But through the Presbyterian Foundation, families can set up a donor advised fund for just $2,500. And then one of the coolest uses of a donor advised fund, because the grants from the family then can be made in the amount of $100 at a time, is to sit with your grandchildren and your children and to say, here's a pool of money that we have. Let everybody pick a cause and discuss how it shows their values, and what it is that they love. And everybody gets to make a grant, say, what if that was one of your Thanksgiving practices around the Thanksgiving table after the meal, or a Christmas practice, around the gift that keeps on giving, which is our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. So, it's possible to establish these things because we have a trust company that allows for life income gifts and lots of different possibilities. But the key thing is to develop a culture. Just did a training myself with the Lake Institute on church-based giving. And we discussed the fact that we'll talk about anything these days in church. We'll talk about all the things that formerly used to be taboo, but we still don't want to talk about money and life energy and our resources. So it's really about creating a culture where there's a healthy conversation that can also uncover the hurt and the pain and heal it. Otherwise we carry it throughout our whole lives. So if there are hurting places, we want to begin to do the healing that is possible around those conversations. To be able to share our values, to be able to share an open and transparent process. You know, as a pastor for all these years, it is so sad when you see families that are divided instead of brought together by these kinds of moments in life, you know. And so a foundation being laid the way it was with the couple that left that legacy. They eventually, the couple I was describing earlier with their children and grandchildren, eventually established 3 fellowships with a bequest of over $1.5 million. They were able to establish 3 fellowships, a meritorious fellowship, a need-based fellowship, and an international fellowship for international students in perpetuity at Austin Seminary. So that was something that their children celebrated, and certainly the seminary celebrated, and all the recipients in perpetuity will celebrate and remember them. The same kinds of things need to happen in our churches, which is why I walk around the building looking at the plaques and asking questions about the plaques, because I want to be sure that these are not hidden memorials, and these are not hidden stories, but rather we need to uncover the stories. What to spend and what to leave. These are the decisions that we make as we're planning our estate plan. And it's important to have the team in place, as I talked about, to do that. I plan to leave most everything on the field, and that I plan. I'm sort of like Bill Gates and Mr. Buffett in that I'm going to give my kids everything that I can to support them in life, and they're already doing so well. I'm beginning to have this at 61. I'm beginning to have the serious conversation with myself and put my team together. These are images of me and my family at University Heights Presbyterian Church in the Bronx, where I grew up. So I'm starting to think, where is my, because I was shaped and formed and could not have lived. Those are my siblings and my godparents and my father and my mother on the steps of University Heights Presbyterian Church. So the church will be a part of my personal estate plan as I am working it out. One of my colleagues, the one who covers the Northwest, has begun to talk to people very seriously about not only constructing a will as part of your documents that are critical documents, but an ethical will. And one great example of that is one that Mary McLeod Bethune, the founder of Bethune-Cookman College, did. And I reference it here. I encourage you to go to www.cookman.edu. I just always remember the first line in that key section of her ethical will, part of her last will and testament, where she says, "I leave you love. Love builds." You know, and so how it is that we perhaps can have workshops in our churches about how, you know, sharing our values with our children to shape and form, and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to shape and form them, becomes part of a larger conversation. I just also, some of you may be familiar with the song, "I Hope You Dance" by Leanne Womack. That's my favorite song. And I always tell my daughter I want it played at my memorial service, you know, because I want everybody to hear in song format the ethical wishes. You know, I hope you never lose your sense of wonder. You get your fill to eat, but always keep that hunger. I hope you always give faith a fighting chance. And when you get the choice to sit it out or dance, I hope you dance. You know, so that's going to be one of my pieces of messaging incorporated in my ethical legacy. So it's about transmitting your values. It's about having the conversation at that level with people. People are afraid, pastors are afraid to raise these issues because we think it's somehow talking to people, anticipating their death, and it's ghoulish, but it's really about life. It's about giving life meaning. And so ethical legacy, transmitting your values in your life, in your church, that needs to be the foundation of these kinds of programs. If we had time, I'd be asking you to flash chat your top values # your heart place in your church and what mission you really love. For me, it's youth choirs. I think, it's one of the things that I learned to sing the faith, and it kept me. Barbara, some of you might know Barbara Renton, when she was the church organist. She became one of the executives of one of our presbyteries here in the Synod of the Northeast, but she was the church organist of the church I grew up in, University Heights Presbyterian Church. And she had all these great youth choirs and taught us. And years ago, I ran into Barbara and I said, Barbara, you picked those songs to teach us theology. I've been reflecting on all these songs that we learned. And she said, so you finally figured it out, kid. So we all have to think and reflect on our heart places and our values. What motivates us to give? Gratitude for what God has done, faith that God will provide, love and compassion for others. We want to make a difference in this world. Belief in the mission or ministry, belief in the leaders, trust. There has to be trust, which means how we are meticulous in following any restrictions and how we are meticulous in celebrating and telling the stories of the people that have gone before and created legacies. There has to be trust, and trust in the mission and ministry of the church, and excitement about it, which means it connects back to the previous webinar about telling our story about the impact of our mission and ministry. That not only supports our annual stewardship program, it supports our plan, giving, and legacy programs. And of course, a lot of people consider the tax benefits. IRAs are some of the most expensive things that you can pass on to your children. It's in terms of estate planning, it is much better to think about giving from those pieces to your charitable causes and the things that are close to your heart. So having those conversations and putting the team together that I've been discussing is the key. Here I begin to talk about the different instruments, but I'm going to kind of skip past that and just name them. A bequest, an endowment gift, resources for building the endowment. Here I'll pause. This is what the Presbyterian Foundation offers. We offer the permanent endowment funds. At some point, people decided that if they're a small church, they don't have a lot of investment professionals. You saw the great return that was received over 40 years from the endowment funds. Some churches decide that they want the option of investing as part of the endowment funds. They want their resources to be invested in what we call almost set it and forget it kind of way. But they don't want to turn their endowment assets over irrevocably to the foundation. So we created something called the Presbyterian Endowment Service that means that you can, because of the way those funds are invested, they're not daily valued and daily liquid, so you can't get them right away. But if you had a big problem and you wanted to invade your principal, even though it's really not a good idea to do that, and it was your only option, then you could. But it's quarterly. It's on you need to do it on a time delay so that there's time to properly, ethically de-invest those resources. So the Presbyterian Endowment Service is an option if you decide that if a church decides that they want their endowment to be managed in the exact same way that the Presbyterian endowment funds are. You would be able to have online viewing of your funds, and you'd get investment reviews annually or more frequently if you wanted them. Another option is the New Covenant Trust Company, which was created in the 1990s for the purpose of being a limited purpose bank that exists as a trust company. It's regulated by the federal government, the office of the National Office of the Comptroller of the federal government, and it's very strictly regulated. It allows us to do investment management services and create life income gifts and trusts for people. And so we become part of the team, as I said, offering that. This is the one option that is fully customizable in terms of our investments. All of our other investments, the other 4 options, follow the denomination socially responsible policy. Under the New Covenant Trust Company, an endowment can be tailored in a way that your own church can decide how it wants to set up its socially responsible policies. And then we have the New Covenant mutual funds, which are self-directed mutual funds, but we established them. They now are managed outside of us, but we are probably the largest shareholder in them through the permanent endowment funds. And so we have a very close connection to them. And many churches hold these mutual funds, and individuals can invest in them as well. And they have performed very well over time. You'll see that I have a slide later with resources that kind of goes into more detail about those options. Life estates and real estate, where donors have the right to continue living in the property. There are lots of different ways that we in the trust company can offer you lawyers and resources and offer you help in helping people who are interested in crafting their legacy gifts. There are lots of different gift items and instruments. I'll leave you to explore these in the slides. As I just want to emphasize this idea of assembling a team. And the team includes your pastor, your attorney, your accountant, your investment advisor, your ministry relations officer, and really begins with you and your family in terms of thinking about what your passion is within the ministry of the mission of the church. This is the piece that I referenced about IRA distributions being a helpful, very helpful tool to keep in mind. This is the chart that I referenced that shows each of those different options, the basic level the amount that begins to make sense for that particular resource, and some of the policy issues that people might question for each of those options. In terms of resources, Stewardship Navigator which is free to you, has a plan giving module. And there's also a separate freestanding plan giving navigator, which makes sense. And I can help you figure out which one, either the freestanding plan giving navigator that has a small subscription fee, or the Stewardship Navigator, which is a free resource and really includes many of the same tools that the subscribed offering has. There's also, we have a Netflix Church Financial Leadership Academy with short videos, and there are short videos on the topic of what an endowment is and how to create it, and some of the resources that we have. And so those short videos can help you interpret this to people who you may be trying to recruit to be on your committee or your governing body. The Stewardship Kaleidoscope Conference, actually today's the last day to register for the virtual track. So if you're interested in learning more about stewardship and hearing some great plenaries, you might want to hurry up and go to www.stewardshipkaleidoscope.org and register for the virtual track. The face-to-face part of the conference in Savannah, Georgia is closed, but we usually have workshops on many topics, and it includes plan giving. So if you start a program, you might want to bring your team next year to Stewardship Kaleidoscope 2023. I don't know where it is yet, but as soon as I know, I'll let the Synod know to advertise it. The Day of Learning recordings, which I said includes some additional material, webinars, 3 different webinars on, or 2 different webinars, I think, on plan giving and how to set up a right-sized program. So if you leave this presentation thinking to yourself, I'm not really clear on all of this, go listen to one of those webinars or reach out to me and contact me with any questions that you have. And I come in and do several workshops that we have created for your church. I help you launch your plan giving program. I help you re-energize it. I can do workshops on composing a legacy or individual consulting. This was the advertisement for our Day of Learning on Plan Giving. This is what the Stewardship Navigator looks like. No, this is what the Church Financial Leadership Academy looks like. You can see we have different sections. We have endowments part 1, endowments part 2, a 2-minute video and a 6-minute video. These are things you can share with your session. These are all free resources. This is the workspace of the Stewardship Navigator. This is the Plan Giving Navigator. And as you can see, there is a tab there for building your program, making brochures, building a Plan Giving website. There's a resource library there. So these are free resources that you have available to you when you sign up through Stewardship Navigator. This, if you see there, there's the manual, the Legacy Giving Program Manual, which is called Legacy of a Lifetime, which is sort of a step-by-step guide to set up your program. And this is what that looks like. It talks about assembling your leadership team, create a legacy vision. You have to be rooted and guided and directed by your own mission statement and your own vision plan in your church. And you pick amongst that and you create a vision statement for your legacy program. You set a goal. You got to know where you're going so that you'll get there. You determine your program logistics and you create a year-round, a year-long communication plan and program. There are lots of different ways to give, either later through your bequests, your life income plans, your pooled income fund, your trusts, life insurances, the list goes on and on. There's ways to give now through your endowment fund, adding to an endowment fund, the donor advised fund, direct gifts, or an IRA. And there's other options as well for giving now. We have helpful resources. We have examples of good endowment policies. We're willing to review your policies with you to update them. Gift instruments, we certainly offer those in real time, but also we can help you understand them better. We can have a conversation with you about legacy societies. There's pros and cons of legacy societies. On the whole, I come down on the pro side. I think that they don't have to be problems for the church. They can be opportunity for people to join a legacy society and tell you that they have you in their estate plan, and give you as much information as they want to give you, and then for you to be able to appropriately steward them in their gift. Because when someone tells you that you're important enough to them to be part of the largest gift, one of the largest gifts they'll ever give in their lifetime, you want to find ways to thank them. In the development world, we say every gift should be thanked 7 times. You should thank people. That's the best practice. Thank the giver 7 times in different ways. For legacy gifts, I think it's sort of like what Jesus said, 70 times 7. You want to create a culture of thanksgiving for people who, and honor the fact that they're saying that they want their life to be remembered in that way. This is just, I'm showing you kind of what's in that kit. It's a month-by-month overview of the actions you would take to set up your plan giving program. I want to say that the most important ingredients in a strong program, I went and visited a church and I was aware that the pastor's only tangentially been part of the process. And so I said to the group, that's a problem. The pastor needs to be very much seen as leading the process, you know, and I'm happy to be a coach in that, or work with churches to help them position that. The most successful programs, the pastor is strongly involved. The session as the governance board is strongly involved. And in point of fact, that's where you begin to get your lead gifts. If your session and your deacons and your key leaders in the church aren't excited about these possibilities, then it's not going to go anyplace as a program. You know, God can do anything, but we know that, you know, historically, if your core leaders are not excited and decide that they want to make some of the lead gifts, that then they can tell the story to people, then you're going to stumble and have a really tough slog with creating these programs. So you really need to work to get that core group excited and interested in this. And then you need a strong committee. You need a group that's willing to say they will give leadership in an ongoing way. They're not going anyplace for at least a couple of years. To really establish this and have that year-round calendar of activities, you need a couple of years. So it's, and that gets into this next slide. You need momentum. You need a multi-year plan. You need top performing plan giving programs deliver messages consistently over a multi-year period. So it's a 12 to 20, to launch it is 3 to 6 months. And then you need to really keep it going in a very active way over 12 to 24 months. And then we anticipate that it will go into a little quieter period and you'll have to retool and rebuild, but you have to plan for that quieter period as well. You know, it'll lay fallow a little bit, you know, in our experience, but then you have to see that not as, oh, you know, we failed, but rather when you've done something with such energy for a couple of years, the leaders feel like they fulfilled it. You're going to have to put a new team in place. You keep people inspired, then you come up with some new programs and plans, and you go from there. You evaluate. You're in an evaluating cycle. So you plan for that as opposed to seeing it as a negative. So the number one ingredient in these programs as they've been researched and analyzed, the most frequently credited factor behind successful programs is leadership support, which is why the pastor being behind it and involving themselves and learning about it and actually participating in helping to be part of the leadership team is so important. The messaging has to be simple and clear. High impact and consistent messaging is evident in more than 75% of successful programs. That is my contact information. I'm going to stop sharing. Where are we at, Lori? We have about 15 minutes left for questions.
Yes, we have 15 minutes. So, and we if you take questions in the chat, or people can actually just, you know, unmute themselves and ask.
It's stump the chump time. That's what I like to say. And if I don't have the answer, I'll go get it. What are preventive conversations? Again, I think that's probably just some languaging that I coined. Don't go out in the world and say, so what does the world say preventive questions are? I like to think about how we can get ahead of things. So rather than having somebody donate a gas station to your church, you want to kind of help people to understand that the kinds of gifts that can be made, the more liquid the gifts are, you know, that's great. I mean, houses are great too, but they're a lot of work for churches. I worked with a church that had two beloved ladies in the church, like a year apart, leave them their entire estates. And right now there's something like over $1 trillion are changing hands generationally. So the people who have loved the church are doing that, you know, so these two beloved ladies left, and one estate was fairly easy to deal with, but the other house and the other estate created a lot of work for the church. And You know, it's looking ahead to say, how can we have preventive conversations both internally and as the way that we talk to people about plan ahead. I guess the part of the preventive is plan ahead, have conversations with us, move in the direction of less restrictive requests. Think about how you can make the request be the most meaningful that you can for the things that you love and care about. Putting those conversations out in ways that people receive them as healthy and helpful to them. Casting those conversations as healthy and helpful conversations, and listening carefully to how they're received as well, and making adjustments along the way. Taking good feedback, listening, paying attention, encouraging it to be an open conversation, and say we're all learning about this together. Those are the kind of preventive measures that I think are helpful to take. Was that clear as mud? How do I get another committee going? Just about everyone who is able and willing to serve or on 2 or 3 committees now. Yeah. The church I told you that grew their endowment from 30,000 to 5 million. There was one person in the church for whom this thing made such great sense to him. He really got it. And he believed in it. And then he attracted a couple of people that he knew were strong communicators and trusted. These people on this committee have to be rock solidly trusted, right? That's really the first thing you need. So you need to start by having the conversation in your governance group and seeing who is drawn to it. You need that. You really need that person or people. Hopefully, wouldn't it be great to have more than one? But it only takes one, is I guess what I'm trying to say. The one person for whom this makes such good sense, and they understand it and they get it. And it may take you time to grow that person, you know, through having me come in and make enough presentations until they're sick of hearing me. or I jumpstart in somebody's spirit the possibility, and they come forward. And maybe oftentimes I've discovered it's the person you don't expect. It's the, you know, God knows those 2 ladies were like millionaires next door. You know, that's that famous book. If you haven't read it, go out and get a copy of it, The Millionaire Next Door. You know, it's in our churches, it's the person who's humble and the least person we would expect, who is a secret, you know, has a secret portfolio, you know, and loves to play the stock market, who, when you present this idea to them, will come forward and say, finally, my church is doing something that I can get behind and get interested in. So that conversation, you do have to address the issues of trust. You know, you need to kind of understand where you are. Do as kind of a assessment of whether you're ready. There's a readiness assessment, and you're going to say, okay, show us where the readiness assessment is. It's not in my hip pocket. It's a process, and it would be something that I could help your leadership team develop. You know, probably, maybe I'll suggest that we put something like that together. I haven't seen it yet, but you need a readiness to ask yourself, do we trust each other in this church? Are we in conflict? You know, how do we work on, you know, making sure that do we already have policies? Do they have to be reviewed first? Is our session on board? Is our pastor on board? You know, there should be some sort of, wait a minute, there is a checklist. You know, it just dawned on me. It's in one of we have a kind of overview of creating, it's not the legacy kit, it's a separate document. I'll send that document to Lori. There is a checklist, which is why it was on my mind. There's an actual checklist of readiness, kind of what you need to do to make sure you're ready to set up a program, because it just dawned on me as I was listing those things off that I've seen them someplace before. pretty sure there's a checklist. So I will send that along as a backup document to this presentation. Does that make sense? Does the person who said how to get another committee together going, did I say enough about that? What about talking to younger families versus more mature members? Once you sit down, once that committee starts working, if this happened, the group I met with two Saturdays ago, Saturday before last, I had a Zoom meeting with them. I presented these ideas to them. They were like shocked. They were like, uh-oh, there's a lot more to this than we realized. They went and they asked for the model policies. They went and created their policies. They got their session on board somewhat. They got their pastor on board somewhat. They developed those two pieces, a brochure and a website. And then they called me back in to say, okay, what's next? What do we do now? And we had a meeting. I had a meeting with them. And part of what we talked about was ideas about not just like suddenly telling people how to give, but you need to do a lot of conversation building about the why, and also meet people's needs, different kinds of needs. Like a single person who lives alone will want something different from the building of their estate plan. And they have different set of fears. What's going to happen to me? Who will take care of me? How can my church be part of my life plan at this point? People, different groups of people will have different needs. And it's really cool. Divorced people have different needs. You know, people who are thinking about, like I said earlier, you know, I suddenly have, I'm freed up because my kids are all doing great, you know, and I'm getting ready to retire in a few years. I'm at a different point in my life journey. And younger families have a different set of questions. So forming the conversation and bringing resources that you would offer to them at the place where they are. Maybe having a focus group with some of those young families and listening to them. What would be helpful? And how does it connect? How does it connect to faith? You see, the conversation about stewardship, the conversation about legacy giving, the conversation about major gift giving. I was with a group of a church that has mostly 30 and 40-year-old stockbrokers and lawyers on their session. I want to ask them how they did that. You know, they're an unusual Presbyterian church, you know, but when I was visiting with them, they were talking about a capital campaign and, you know, they had very savvy questions. It's now the time to launch it with equities being where they are. And, you know, the needs of that community are different, but because they're very savvy, but it connects to the question of how do I deal with the sort of suburban loneliness of my faith, right? You know, how does this all connect to how I'm making meaning in my life and how I'm drawing purpose from my life and where my very limited life energy is going now and how I also see myself planning for how I'm building, you know, it's like, how am I building a life that has meaning? And for those folks, you start a different set of programming, you know, potentially. So thinking creatively, and we do have we've got some peer networks that you can join if you look on our website. You know, there's a whole lot of different resources, you know, and also I'm a person who has 62 good ideas before breakfast. Not all of them are great ideas, though. You know, so, but in dialogue with you, we're walking alongside you and working with you. The hope is that you come up with the ones that are right for you, you know. But I have a tendency to just kind of want to brainstorm and think about the possibilities.
Rose, I think there was one more question. There was a hand up earlier.
Okay.
Leah, do you want to just ask your question directly?
Sure. I was thinking, like, I know you talked a lot about building trust as the foundation, but
I find it hard, no matter what age my parishioners are, to talk to them about making plans that has anything related to death and dying and legacy. So, I mean, to even do funeral planning kind of stuff and to talk about that, because I think it's hugely important. And I think that this is a part of that larger conversation. So, do you have any, like, I don't know, insider tips as to how to do it without having people, like, I feel like people go la 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 la, like, and I don't like, how do you bridge that gap? And it doesn't matter
Right.
their age.
Right, right. Yeah, I think you have to connect it. You have to continue. The reason why I started talking about telling the story of the mission and vision of the church, that is the primary piece. Getting people to talk about what it is that brings them joy in the life of their church. Getting people to think, there is a pastor, Wyatt T. Walker. He was the strategist for Martin Luther King Jr. He was a mentor of mine when I was early in ministry in a church that I served in Mount Vernon, New York. And he used to come preach at various events. He pastored a church in Manhattan and Harlem, but he was a sort of famous civil rights leader, right? Wyatt T. Walker. I'll never forget, Wyatt T. Walker said that when we preach, and I'm doing a workshop for Stewardship Kaleidoscope, I'm preaching stewardship year round. And I'm going to talk about this, that Wyatt T. Walker said that anytime we preach or we talk about God's presence in our lives, we always need to touch on the subject of eternity. Eternity needs to be built in there. The idea that it's bigger than us, that there is a sense in which we are part of a plan that is eternal, and so the more we build that into our approach to things, and the more that we help people to recognize that, without, the famous, there's, I must admit I've said it a few times, but it doesn't really help, right? That knee-jerk reaction out of frustration when you remind people that, I know I've been a pastor for a long time and I've never seen a moving van behind a hearse. So that doesn't help. That's not the best way to do it. Although with frustration, sometimes we do. But the truth of the matter is, it's true. And so at some point we have to find some joy in the question. And see, the reason people are willing to hear these questions from their colleges, and they're willing to hear these questions from Habitat for Humanity. What is it that blocks them from wanting to hear it from us, which is the place that's supposed to be all about, the ultimate things. We're supposed to be about ultimate things. So, but Pastor, it shouldn't be just you by yourself. That's the other thing. That's why I'm talking about a team approach, and that's why I'm talking about preparation and readiness preparation. And you have to get your leaders comfortable first. Your leaders have to be exposed and embrace the idea that this is a conversation that is a blessing. Like Henry Nouwen came to that belief, that even though he was uncomfortable with the idea of the conversation, he came to the understanding that if this is what God's plan is for my life and for the group that I'm talking with, their life, then, and they have discerned that these are the things that matter to them, then it is the best gift that you can give them to offer the opportunity to support it if they have the ability to do that. So when I was in development work, it took me a long time to fully embrace, that this is actually received by people who, if you're talking to them about the thing that they love, the thing that they'd love to see go on and bless and have an impact on other people's lives, and they have the resources, and they know that they can create a living legacy that will be remembered. Or there are some people who want to do that anonymously, and that's fine too, that they find the greatest joy in that idea, that I'm doing this just for God. Only God and I will know, and you've got to make room for that conversation. But having a healthy conversation about this turns into such an opportunity, and people who want it receive it that way. People who are ready for it take it as a gift, take it as a blessing. The first time you experience that, you go, that's very tasty. I want more of that. The first time I ever had a conversation like that, where somebody said, who thanked me for the opportunity to create an endowment for the seminary of $1 million. I thought, and I'm talking scale, right? It's very possible in many churches for that to happen, but it could be a $10,000 endowed gift. Just whatever you decide is a major gift within your context. With the person who said, I can do that, and I want to do that, and I feel grateful to do that, and then they thank me, and I said, that's mighty tasty. That tastes really sweet. I want more of that. So and the person who does it, who exercises their spiritual giving muscles, does the same thing. They say, oh, that's mighty tasty. How can I do more? What more can I do? And how can I really celebrate that I'm doing it? How do you spell Henry's last name? Nouwen, N-O-W, it's Henri, actually, he's French. So Henri, Henri, Nouwen, Nouwen. And so if you look in the Amazon store, you'll find that he has this, it also has a workbook, which would be a healthy thing to do with your leadership, of the spirituality of fundraising workbook. It's something that could be utilized with committees.
Well,
So
thank you, Rose. I think we've come to the end of our time. Well, actually the end, a little over.
I'm sorry about that.
Oh, no. Thank you for sharing with us. This session has been recorded. So for those of you who know people who wanted to join us but couldn't get here, let them know. It will be available shortly, the recording. And I think we have one more session in our series coming up in early November.
Yeah, I think so. Is it the 10th?
I
Not sure.
think so. The date's gonna get out there. I apologize, I don't have the date at the top of my head. My mind is filled with Synod Assembly right now. But we will be getting some emails out, some communications out with the date for our next one. And please continue to give us your feedback about what other sessions you'd like to have, what other topics you think would be relevant, so that we can get those queued up for you. Rose is our partner, the Presbyterian Foundation is our partner in serving you, and so we appreciate your time. Okay, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you all.
Oh, I should stop recording.